Well, hello and welcome to another MaritzCX webinar. I'm Tom Evans, and on behalf of our MaritzCX team on today's program, let me say thank you for joining us. So let's get started with today's presenters. I'm going to start introductions with Jennifer Passini. And if you attend many of our webinars, you've heard JP present. She's one of our most popular presenters, and we're always happy when she has a break from her busy business travels to help us out. And JP is Senior Director of CX Solution Strategy for MaritzCX, and she is responsible for providing CX consultative support to organizations looking to implement new CX programs or enhance their existing efforts. And Jennifer is aligned with the financial services industry, where she has been helping clients for about 16 years. So glad to have JP with us again. And then also joining us today is Jen Rubin. Jen is Associate Practice Lead for MaritzCX. And in this capacity, she works with MaritzCX client success teams to share best practices in how clients are improving customer understanding, deriving insights across survey programs and operational data, and using technology to more effectively share CX feedback and facilitate taking action. And Jen has over 20 years of experience in CX and marketing research. So with those intros, I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Passini and to get us started. Jennifer.
Thanks, Tom. And Tom already gave a lot of background in terms of how we got here, and so I won't spend much time there, but thank you, all of you that submitted questions. I speak for Jen also that we appreciate the questions we received. We're continue to be surprised and overwhelmed for the support that and the amount of questions that we receive that kind of support the development of the content for these Ask the Expert webinars. Really the goal for us is to take all of those questions, and we read through all of them and we boil it down into topic areas that we plan to cover as part of the session. And as Tom mentioned, we had a broader kind of operationalizing session in February, and one of the topic areas is that we covered was inner and outer loop, which we're going to dig in deeper today. And we really found that we could only really scratch the surface. Again, even today, there's a lot more to say, but we hope that we'll answer at least a majority of the questions that came in, and with the different topic areas that we're planning to cover. We'll cover our approach. We'll share some stories along the way. And as I mentioned, the topic area today is closed loop systems, and we recommend that at 2 levels. Most of the industry actually talks about it in terms of 2 levels. The first is InnerLoop, which is your ability to follow up with customers individually when they provide feedback. And for me, when I talk with clients within the financial services sector, I talk about the InnerLoop is the easiest and most valuable way to demonstrate the importance of customer feedback on business outcomes in terms of customer retention. Today, with technology and with social media and everything available to people to provide feedback, we know a couple of things. We know they're willing to provide feedback, but we also know that there are expectations in terms of listening to their individual voice and remediating their individual need. So that's really what InnerLoop is about. And then we're also going to cover OuterLoop, which is essentially the aggregation of all the customer feedback and the identification of systemic issues, those issues that are not just impacting one customer, but they're impacting many customers. And those systemic issues really lead to efforts of continuous improvement. And so we're going to share best practices and some stories about ways to successfully implement inner and outer loop. Jen and I are going to kind of tag team this today, and Jen's going to start out talking about InnerLoop. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jen to discuss InnerLoop. Jen?
Thanks, Jennifer. All right. So when I start a topic, I always like to ask why. Why do we invest the time and energy into conducting InnerLoop or customer recovery efforts? And most of you attending today probably have already bought into the value of customer recovery or case management efforts, but it never hurts to reinforce why we invest time and energy into this. So I want to share this article that appeared in Harvard Business Review about a year ago which I think does a really nice job of monetizing the value of customer recovery efforts within two industries, specifically the airline industry and wireless, among wireless providers. And while their methodology examines the potential ROI of customer follow-up based on tweets, I believe the same principles apply to following up with customers who've invested time in completing their surveys usually. So let me briefly explain the research that they did to demonstrate the ROI of customer follow-up and some of the key things that they learned in this study. So in this study, they identified about 400,000 customer service-related tweets sent to the top 5 airlines, American, Delta, JetBlue, Southwest, and United, and the top 4 wireless carriers, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon. And they contacted these customers on Twitter up to about 6 months after they originally tweeted the companies. And they asked them to take a brief survey. They didn't tell them what the survey was about, but that survey had a conjoint exercise in there about purchasing future airline tickets as well as wireless service. And in the scenario with the airline ticket, that varied dimensions such as the airline brand, the seat type, on-time arrival rate, and fare, obviously. We want to get at that value. And a similar exercise occurred for those who tweeted about a wireless provider. They had almost 2,000 survey participants that were split across 3 groups. The first group were those that had received a response from the company back to their original tweet. The second group did not receive a response to their original tweet. And the third group was a control group, and that group of individuals had no customer service interaction with the company. So what did they learn? They learned that customers who interacted with a brand's customer service representative on Twitter were significantly more likely to pay more for the brand or choose that brand more often from a comparably priced consideration set compared to that control group of customers who had no such interaction. So let's get a little more specific. Across all the tweets, and regardless of whether the customer used a negative, neutral, or positive tone, they found that customers who received any kind of response to their tweet were willing to pay almost $9 more for a ticket on that airline in the future. The results were even more impactful for wireless carriers. The customers who received any kind of response to their tweet were willing to pay $8 more on average for a monthly wireless plan from that carrier. So annually, a lot more impactful to that wireless provider compared to that control group who had no customer service interaction. In addition, they found that receiving a response improved their overall NPS score for both the airlines and the wireless carriers compared to that control group, and that those effects held up for at least 6 months after that interaction, suggesting that there is some permanence to the positive impact of that good service. As they examined the results further by type of follow-up, speed of follow-up, and the original customer sentiment in the original tweet, they were able to demonstrate what type of follow-up generates the most value. So as you see here on this slide, the faster the company is to respond, the more positive the impact is on the organization. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that you need to respond to surveys within 5 minutes. However, I do think that we see similar effects regardless of channel, as long as the company is responding faster than what the customer expects. So in the customer service space, the average customer expects that companies will help them within 5 minutes by phone, within an hour by social media, and between 1 to 24 hours by email. The expectations customers have for follow-up from a customer survey vary by industry, and some spaces, they don't have expectations that you're going to follow up. That gives you a little bit more allowance with time, but the premise still holds true. The faster you are to respond, the better. Another finding that they were able to demonstrate in the study was that, and this is probably intuitive, but providing some sort of resolution to their problem was worth more, but it still was value to still call the customer even if you weren't able to resolve that issue. And it demonstrates that sometimes customers are just looking for some empathy. And so even when the customers used a negative or even angry tone in their initial tweet, and the customer service team was able to respond and apologize, but not necessarily resolve the issue, this still was associated with increased brand value. It was only about $2 more what they were willing to spend for that airline, but they were still willing to pay more for that brand. And this is consistent with what we see in other psychology research, showing that we as individuals dislike the uncertainty of making a request to someone and not hearing anything back. The third area that they were able to demonstrate was not to ignore your happiest customers. They found that the highest increase in willingness to pay actually came when the businesses responded to customers who tweeted a positive comment about the company. Receiving a response to a positive comment generated $28 more for a future airline ticket and $12 more per month for wireless plans. Finally, the fourth area that they demonstrated was the importance of keeping the response personal. Customers who received an unsigned response showed no detectable increase in willingness to pay compared to the general population. But when the customer service agent added their name or their initial into their first reply to the customer, they observed that their willingness to pay increased by $14 for a future flight on that same airline compared to those who received an unsigned response. So importance of making sure it's a personal, they can associate the response with a personal individual from your company. So let's talk a little bit more about the InnerLoop process that we're using with survey feedback or other operational or social media data that you may be responding to. So the process is pretty simple. The customer provides feedback. You have some predefined triggers to alert you of dissatisfaction or an opportunity for follow-up, either positive or negative. The alert leads to a case to be managed and for specific defined protocol to be followed to address the customer's feedback. Case management can occur in different platforms and really depends on what the tools are that are already in place within your organization. The goal as a CX leader is to really reduce any barriers to making it easy to follow up with customers, easy and efficient. So with this in mind, I'm going to go through in this section some best practices for defining triggers for alerts, determining who within the organization should handle the alerts generated, and handling alerts. And continuous refinement of this process is critical because the labor that I see clients investing into this is really significant. One of our Fortune 500 clients that my team is working with to refine their case management process at the moment estimates that they spend about $100 million annually to follow up with customers from their high volume transactional survey. So if we're able, and what our goal is, to reduce the frontline labor to follow up with those customers further and refine some of the cost of reparations that are being provided by just 10%, we save the organization $10 million. So opportunity exists here. So we received a few questions on how to prioritize which issues or situations, which ones should you be following up on? And I think this is one of the most important aspects of the closed loop process. So I want to talk through a few different best practices. First, I think it's important to follow up on both the positive and the negative feedback. We often see clients focusing on the negative, but just as the Harvard Business Review article pointed out, you can really have a greater loyalty impact when you take the time to follow up with positive customers, to thank them for saying the nice things about your organization and deepen that relationship. The next principle that should be considered when you're defining your triggers is to make sure you're focusing on what's truly important. When you look at your data overall, what are some of the elements that really cause dissatisfaction? And prioritize those things to make sure you're resolving any relationships that might otherwise be broken with left unresolved. Make sure you're not limiting your closed loop system to just survey feedback or solicited feedback. There are many ways that customers give you feedback that could be part of this closed loop system. Customers tend to be more honest when giving feedback on their own terms. So it sounds like I'm recommending to follow up with every customer who completes a survey or provides you some feedback. And ideally, I'd love that. That would be the best. But obviously, resources are not going to allow for that. So what I'm sharing with you on this slide is an example of what one of our clients is doing and how they approach segmenting their customers and prioritizing their limited resources for follow-up. And you can see on the slide that the majority of customers are responded with an automated type of response. And that's actually been very effective for them. They've gotten positive feedback on those responses because it acknowledges that they took the time to take the survey and that that feedback was received. But you can see from the more colorful cells that they are really prioritizing based on that customer's value and some modeling work we've done together to prioritize issues and items that are most likely to lead to defection without intervention. So they're prioritizing those for follow-up. I'm really excited to see, and they are also using text analytics as part of this process to trigger some of the alerts and generate cases. And I think using text analytics for those triggers can really help refine not just the prioritization, but also the escalation process that's being used so that specific types of issues are getting to the right people quickly within the organization who can resolve that customer's need. And this helps the organization provide a faster response, which we know is really important based on the data that you just saw in the Harvard Business Review study. So we also received a number of questions regarding who in the organization should be responsible for closing the loop with the customer. Ideally, organizations should take a blended approach of decentralized and centralized. One of our clients applies a blended approach by using text analytics again to help route the cases appropriately. The text analytics generated alerts helps add a watcher to escalate cases that are outside the front line's control in terms of having those get resolved. And what we've seen as some clients move towards adopting a blended approach is that usually it's a well-orchestrated effort, but it's usually evolved from either a decentralized process that originated or a centralized process. So let's take a few minutes to talk about each of those processes. When I think about clients that are currently employing a decentralized approach, several of them have used that very effectively as part of their strategy to move the organization to become more customer-centric overall. The decentralized process builds greater awareness and empathy with a customer at the local or department level when it's prioritized consistently across all locations and departments. However, there are some disadvantages that occur with the decentralized approach. And one may be that sometimes those local levels are providing unnecessary freebies or discounts in lieu of their ability to actually solve the customer's problem that's a result of a systemic issue outside of their control. So let's talk about centralized. where they might be closer to the individuals within the organization who have the control to change some of those systemic issues. Clients who've taken a centralized approach to case management are often much more efficient in providing consistent and timely customer responses. However, what that gains, those gains lose out on is that they're not always consistently providing the feedback back to the frontline manager or that team that was responsible for generating the issue in the first place. So you lose out on some of that culture that you may be trying to drive into the organization. When I think about the decentralized versus centralized view, sometimes this gets tied in with compensation. And I know that there are some organizations out there that are still providing compensation based on achieving a certain NPS or other key metric score, but there's real opportunity in incentivizing customer-centric behavior and helping manage the behaviors around closing the loop is one that's measurable in a way that can be positively reinforcing when you're talking about making sure that that full closed loop process occurs. Setting goals for following up with a minimum number of customers within a defined period of time can help drive some of that consistency in customer follow-up and response that organizations seek. So regardless of who is responsible ultimately for closing the loop, whether that's decentralized or centralized, the customer follow-up process needs to make it easy for those individuals to help escalate an issue effectively within the organization. Several clients are starting to include a process that allows you as a caseworker to provide input into the case management process by providing links within the case form to create an alert that this issue that this customer is experiencing is an example of something that needs to be systemically addressed. So you can see here on the slide that in this client example that we have some links down here to a resource library to help provide some guidance to that caseworker. We have that ability to raise an OuterLoop issue, and we also have a contact list of different issues that customer can reach out, or that caseworker can reach out to within the organization to help identify who they should escalate an issue to. And I think with this client that we're working with in particular, when we are providing those guidelines on when should that caseworker raise an OuterLoop issue, the guiding principle is that it should occur when that caseworker does not have the authority to resolve this issue and make that customer satisfied. So let me give you a few more specific examples of that. So has the customer raised an issue that only the executive leadership can impact and will greatly improve their experience with the organization? Has that caseworker learned something from a customer about competitive products or features that your organization should be aware of? Has your customer experienced a repeated issue and needs someone from senior leadership to step in so that they don't leave? Or if your customer is asking for a product enhancement that will result in increased business for them and customers you think, other customers, that's an opportunity to raise an OuterLoop issue. So these are a few examples of how you can build planning for the OuterLoop process into the day-to-day activities of the InnerLoop process. I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer, who's going to talk to you more about some best practices in the OuterLoop process.
Thanks, Jen. And I'll kind of pick up where you left off here in just a minute. OuterLoop really is an aggregation of the things that you learn that you're focused on individually for customers within the InnerLoop. It's about focused on understanding and fixing systemic issues, and it's really the cornerstone of a continuous improvement process. So if your organization is committed, which most are committed to continuously improving not only what customers experience, but improving how your organization delivers on the customer experience and focuses on business outcomes, then you're really focused on OuterLoop. So let's talk about what that means. And Jen started talking about OuterLoop within the context of InnerLoop, because really the individual feedback that you're learning from customers gives you an opportunity to follow up with them individually, but at an aggregate, it also gives you an opportunity to address those things that aren't just individual customer issues. They're issues that are impacting many customers. And so, this aggregation allows you to explore those things. The triggers are similar in terms of, customers are dissatisfied, you're focused on causes. It could be certain customer groups that you're focused on. But really what you're asking yourself is, when you're listening to your customers through individual remediation and you're following up with them, you should encourage your organization to ask, is this an isolated issue? And the reality is, in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. But things to look for in terms of commonalities are there common triggers of dissatisfaction that you're learning from many customers? Are they all the same? Is the cause that you're generating when you're going through that InnerLoop process and you're following up with customers, is the cause of their dissatisfaction or the cause of their issue consistent? Is it the same every time? Is it the same types of customers that are impacted, and are they having the same type of interactions? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then you have an opportunity to focus on that issue systemically, meaning that it's impacting many, many customers. And as I mentioned, and Jen mentioned too, learning from your case management system in terms of following up with individual customers is critical here. And it's one trigger that can indicate that you have a systemic issue worth following up on. So we encourage you to follow up with, to listen to your customers, and include the opportunity for your employees to provide input in that process. As we think about the triggers for whether you should focus on something because it's a systemic issue, that was one of the questions that someone asked that submitted. One of the questions that was submitted to us is just, how do you know when you should focus on something as part of a closed loop process? Your employees can tell you that. Your employees are one source that can help highlight the issues. And when you think about, as your case workers go through and follow up with individual customers, especially if they're saying things like, I've heard this a lot, or whatever fix was put in place, this continues to happen, and so the fix is either not available or it's outside of their control. That's an opportunity to address from a systemic standpoint, and allow your employees that opportunity to escalate that through providing some recommendations on what should be included in the closed outer loop process. So just to follow up on other triggers of systemic improvement opportunities, again, the triggers are similar just in terms of, if you have a group of customers that are dissatisfied, then it's an opportunity to look at it from a systemic standpoint. You can look at poor performance against key drivers. You can look at particular customer segments. So many of our clients today go through a quarterly business review process, and one of the things that many of our clients include as part of that quarterly review process is to track their performance against key drivers. So they'll run true driver analyses or some other key driver analyses, and they'll identify the things that are most important to driving satisfaction and loyalty. As part of their business review process, they're looking at those things, those key drivers, and seeing how they're performing. If there's areas where there's poor performance for key drivers, then that's where they're focusing. And it's a great way to kind of introspectively review how well you're delivering for the customer against those key drivers. Those can certainly reflect systemic improvement opportunities. And we had a few questions about how you prioritize because there might be a lot of things that you need to work on when you look at your scores or when you look at your trends, or especially if you look at individual customer feedback, there might be a lot of areas that you could focus on. And so prioritization becomes important. Leverage key driver analyses or other things like business impact, or the number of customers that are impacted by a particular issue, or the type of customers that are impacted, particularly if they're high value customers, or if there's some business activity or strategy for which this systemic improvement opportunity could help improve. Leverage those things to help set priorities and focus on just a few things. So let me give you an example in terms of story. As I mentioned, a lot of our clients will leverage a quarterly business review process, and for this client, they did just that. And what they learned, and what they had known for a while, is that there were a group of customers that were historically dissatisfied. And these customers this is for an insurance company, and they had a group of customers who had switched agents or made a change in agents, and historically they were a dissatisfied group. They were historically unhappy, and in some cases we just accepted it. No one likes change, particularly with agents that you've selected, and having to choose a new agent or being switched to a new agent can be a change that's painful. And so we just kind of accepted that they were going to be a dissatisfied group. But when we dug into it a little bit more, what the company learned is that poor performance was isolated to a particular area. So they did some pretty significant root cause. And in this particular case, they conducted customer journey mapping. Customer journey mapping isn't always required for root cause analyses, but in this case, they really had no idea what was driving their dissatisfaction beyond the change. So they conducted customer journey mapping and looked at key critical touch points. They were able to see that they were doing well in some areas, but that the customers were truly unhappy in important areas. So, one area was rate increase. Well, no one likes a rate increase. Okay, we're going to accept that. But other areas in terms of communication, of notification, and actually meeting their new agents were things that they could focus on. So they looked at areas where they had poor ratings, where they had negative perceptions, and where they had high attrition rates, and said, okay, these are things that we need to fix. And as I mentioned, they conducted customer journey mapping. They did a deep dive in particular areas and found that there were things that they could fix specific to communication and process that were leading customers to leave the company and were really impacting their high rates of attrition. What's important about this story is that they not only focused on a particular customer segment in terms of root cause and drilled into that customer segment. They leveraged what they knew about the customer and explored their journey, which was important. But they really conducted a thorough root cause to fix the things that were truly broken. It would have been easy for them to continue to accept that this group of customers were just historically dissatisfied. It makes sense. Change sucks. No one likes it, so they're dissatisfied. It would have been easy just to continue to accept that. But they didn't. They conducted root cause to understand what was truly impacting. Surprisingly, there were things that they could easily fix. And so they made some changes, and what they saw was a dramatic improvement in retention rates. I think this group was, without the fixes, were 3 times more likely to attrite, and they were able to turn that around. So there's real reasons to conduct a root cause. And as we think about the action planning process in general, many times what we find is that if your organization does not have a systemic process for addressing issues that are coming up, it's easy to jump directly from, okay, we've identified an issue, and go straight to the solution. I know that I certainly do that as a solution person. I hear about a problem, I immediately want to jump to, okay, well, here's things that we could do. I do that at home, I do that at work, and it's easy to jump from issue to solution. But what we're really encouraging is a systematic process focused on really defining the issue, doing what you can to thoroughly explore the root cause, creating an action plan which includes defining a team And I'm going to talk about that in a minute in terms of an example, and creating a plan. And then most importantly, defining what success looks like. If you put a fix in place, what does success look like? Both from a customer experience standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. And the last example that I gave, it wasn't enough for them to say, okay, we've improved the satisfaction of this customer group of people that have switched agents. It wasn't enough for the insurance company to do that. They wanted to tie that to retention rates and the value of retaining those customers. And so they were able to report back and say, these changes not only helped improve our scores in these areas, but it helped us retain exponentially more customers that were valued at this amount in terms of the business that they brought to the company. So this is the action planning process that we recommend. Similar to Jen's presentation of the InnerLoop process, I've started a couple areas where I'm going to focus on best practices. So let's first, and I've covered root cause, but let's first talk about who's involved. So one of the questions that came in was related to who should be involved in the closed loop process. Jen's already covered off on centralized versus decentralized, and those that approach remains for OuterLoop as well. But even more important is to engage those that are involved in a particular area. So let me give you an example. Let's say that, and this is a true story, but let me kind of lay it out for you. Let's say that we have a call center touch point, and we learned that the biggest opportunity that we have is to address poor perceptions related to call time. Again, if you take the easy way, you might say, which is what this client did initially, the easy thing is to say, okay, let's retrain reps to keep their calls as brief as possible, to get the customer on the phone and get them off. Address their issue as quickly as possible. In this particular case, the outcome was that scores didn't improve, scores actually dropped, and what they realized is that they didn't fix the right thing. They jumped directly from identifying the issue to the solution and the action plan. They didn't connect root cause, they didn't involve the right people in the solution, they didn't really have a plan other than to retrain. They didn't really know what they were retraining on other than quicker service. And so what they did was took a step back and thought more thoroughly about the root cause. They formed action teams that included reps. They did a thorough review of the IVR and the systems that supported the call center experience, as well as reviewed customer feedback to help identify the root cause. And instead, we're able to help shape and change system issues that were impacting the length of the call. So the number of prompts that the customer went through, the number of times they had to be on hold because of the number of reps that were available. All of those things were things that they could develop a specific action plan to improve. One plan was to improve the routing within the system. One plan was in place to figure out maybe how to triage calls with a certain group and then allow other calls to handle some more of the difficult calls that would require time. So by focusing on the right root cause, they were able to put the right action plans in place, and they were able to explore success against improvement in scores and also operational effectiveness. So it's really important that you ask yourself as you identify an issue, who needs to be involved in this particular action plan? The short answer is going to be the people within the CX team and the touch point leaders that are responsible for that touch point, but there might need to be other people. In this case, the call center reps were included for input. Those that were responsible for the call center technology were involved, and then anyone that was involved in the development of the experience and training and managing the reps were also involved. So it's important you think through who's going to be best to not only help diagnose the issue, but also who's going to be the best people to support development of the action plan and who's going to have to help implement it. Of course, we recommend that you take steps as part of your CX program in general to ensure that everyone in the organization understands their role in the customer experience. I've already mentioned that employees are your most valuable asset in not only understanding customer experience, but understanding the things that the organization needs to do to fix certain things. And we had one question specifically related to team huddles. And we do have a number of organizations today, other companies that MaritzCX supports, that actively engage in the huddle process, particularly within financial services. I know of a number of banks that leverage that daily or weekly huddle process within their branches and then with their call center network. This is an actual picture from one of our banks that we support within the UK. They have an ongoing relationship and transactional VOC program, and they share results daily with their branch and call center teams so that they're not only listening to the real voice of the customer, but they are working together to figure out what to do to improve. And so in this process, employees have the opportunity to provide their own input to support not only changes within the branch, the interpretation of customers' experiences, which has supported not only development of employee culture, empowering them to be part of the process, but it's also given tangible evidence of opportunities to improve the customer experience. In this particular case, within their call center environment, they've been able to realize close to $9 million in operational effectiveness related to this huddle process and leveraging employee input and actionability and the action plans that are taken towards continuous improvement. I'm just going to wrap up with a few other best practices. I think that Jen and I mentioned a number of these along the way, so I'll just summarize real quick. The most important part of the closed loop process, whether it's the inner loop or the outer loop, is to take advantage of the information that you have. One thing that we didn't talk about is that you can triangulate on a lot of different data sources to help inform your process of following up with customers. For example, as much as you can do, even within the InnerLoop process, to include details about the customer, other experiences that they've had, maybe some details about their relationship with the organization, maybe their history in terms of how many times they've talked about this issue as part of your remediation for them individually, and to be as informed as possible is going to help you deliver the best experience there. The same is true for the outer loop. So just be informed, fix the right things, conduct that root cause and make sure that you're fixing the right things. Involve the right people in the process, and that might be, beyond just that touch point. If you think about, I know within financial services, you think about, a particular product area with mortgages, there are a number of people that support the mortgage originations process beyond just the loan officer. And so if you have a problem in that particular area, think about all of the people that you need to involve, not only to understand the issue, but also to brainstorm ways to fix the issue. Be realistic in timing. I think this is probably the biggest mistake that we make, is to think that change is going to happen quickly. So be realistic, and I think for some of the systemic issues that you might identify, some of those changes take time, not only to diagnose the issue, but to actually make the change. And so make sure that you're realistic within your teams in terms of timing and when you need to remeasure whether change occurred. Probably the biggest thing that comes out of an action planning process and a commitment to continuous improvement are best practices. I know within MaritzCX, we spend a lot of time even internally talking about best practices and sharing best practices. We have a Ask the Expert email address where we can ask questions of each other and share best practices. That's how we make sure we're not recreating the wheel, and we make sure that we're leveraging the best of what MaritzCX has to offer for all of our clients. We encourage the same type of approach in terms of documenting things that work and sharing those best practices so that no one's recreating the wheel when things have already been addressed. And also make sure that you define success. success will come in a lot of shapes and sizes. It could be success will look like happier customers, better retention, operational effectiveness. All of those things, make sure that you're defining your goal and tracking your progress against those things. And I think with that, that's it. I thank you for your time today. I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to wrap things up.
Great. Thanks, JP and Jen. Yeah, awesome. Always impressed by the knowledge you two have in this space. So, and thanks for, taking the time to answer all those questions and put some real and genuine thought into those. I know that's a lot of time that's involved in that, but very helpful and insightful. And hopefully we were able to answer a lot of questions today. And again, there were a few questions that did come in during the webinar. If you were one of those that submitted a question during the presentation, just be looking for an email from Jen or JP within the next couple of days, and they'll have an answer for you. But that'll put a wrap on our webcast today. Again, thank you for joining us, and it's been our pleasure to bring this MaritzCX event to you. So until next time, hope you can join us on May the 9th for our next webinar. Thank you.